The first time I saw Robert Hayes, he was already gone, yet somehow he was still speaking to me in the language of the impossible. The morgue was cold, the fluorescent lights flickering above, casting long shadows on the steel tables that smelled faintly of antiseptic and inevitability. I had walked this floor hundreds of times, seen countless bodies in various states of decay, but nothing prepared me for the sight that froze me in place. From Robert's pale, still form, a thin rivulet of deep red traced across the stark white sheet, pooling slowly, unnervingly, almost as if his body refused to let go entirely. I remember my breath catching, the logical part of my mind scrambling for answers, while another part whispered in disbelief. This shouldn't be happening. In the chaos of that moment, my mind flashed back to the day Robert died. He had been at home with his wife, Margaret, and his daughter, Claire. An ordinary morning, breakfast plates clinking, the smell of coffee curling through the air, and then the sudden collapse. Heart monitor flatlined before the paramedics even reached the front door. Margaret's scream still echoes in my memory, and Claire's small, shaking hands clutching the emergency responders as they tried desperately to revive him. Every frantic second stretched into an eternity, every beep and alarm a cruel punctuation to the life that had just ended. And then, everything changed. I had walked into the morgue expecting cold, clinical certainty. I expected answers, explanations, the familiar comfort of forensic routine. Instead, I was met with something that defied every textbook, every lecture, every experience I had. Blood, warm, fluid, alive in its appearance, seeped from a body that should have been utterly still. It moved with a slow, almost deliberate insistence, leaving patterns that suggested some hidden logic, some unfathomable design. My hands hovered over the stainless steel edge of the table, gripping it, steadying myself against the dread creeping up my spine. I kept asking myself, could it be decomposition? Could it be a ruptured vessel, or some chemical reaction inside the body? I had seen post-mortem bleeding before, but never like this. Not so sudden, not so deliberate in appearance. It was as if the very laws of biology were bending around me. Shadows of doubt and fascination mingled in my chest, a heavy, suffocating weight that would not lift. I remember standing there for what felt like hours, alone with Robert, trying to make sense of the impossible, wondering if the world itself had paused just to witness this silent rebellion against death. And yet, amid the shock, I felt a strange empathy. Robert's eyes, closed as they were, seemed to hold the story of a man whose life had ended too abruptly, whose body was now telling a tale that science could not yet interpret. The room was silent except for the slow hum of the morgue's refrigeration system, punctuated by the occasional drip of crimson onto tile. Each drop was a question without an answer, a reminder that the line between life and death is far thinner, for a stranger, than anyone wants to admit. That night, I left the morgue with a weight I could not shake. The image of Robert and his inexplicable bleeding burned into my memory. Sleep offered no respite. My mind replayed the scene over and over, and I realized that this case would follow me, haunt me, demand answers I was not sure existed. Somewhere in the cold, silent morgue, a mystery had begun, one that would challenge everything I thought I knew about death, biology, and the human body's final, enigmatic secrets. Robert Hayes was, by most accounts, an ordinary man, 58 years old, mild hypertension, a fondness for gardening, and a steady job as a postal worker. His neighbors remembered him as polite, quiet, always waving from his porch in the early morning light. To his family, he was a husband, a father, a man who rarely complained, who carried his life with a quiet dignity. Yet, on the morning of his death, the ordinariness of Robert's life shattered in an instant. One moment, he was preparing toast in the kitchen. The next, he collapsed to the tile floor, his body failing him in a way no one could have predicted. The emergency responders who arrived spoke in measured, clinical tones about heart rhythms and CPR, but behind their professionalism was a raw, palpable grief. His daughter, Claire, had been too small to understand fully what was happening, yet she would later describe the moment she realized her father might never rise again as like watching the sun fall behind a mountain and knowing it will never shine the same way again. His wife, Margaret, sat in stunned silence, clinging to hope, repeating almost mechanically that the paramedics would save him. But the monitors flatlined, the alarms blaring a tragic confirmation that life, as they knew it, had ended. In the morgue, as I later reviewed Robert's medical chart, I tried to trace the origins of this sudden, unexplained death. Hypertension, yes, but nothing that should have caused such rapid collapse. His cholesterol levels were manageable, his heart function relatively stable for his age. There were no tumors, no hidden aneurysms revealed in scans or prior exams. To the untrained eye, Robert was just another patient whose life had ended. But to me, each line of his history became a thread leading into a tapestry of mystery, because nothing about him should have led to the phenomenon I would witness post-mortem. I explained to the family the basic science in simple terms, as gently as I could. Blood normally clots when the heart stops. Post-mortem circulation ceases. Hypostasis, The settling of blood in the lower parts of the body should leave faint discoloration, not a crimson flood tracing across a sheet. Yet here was Robert, defying these rules. It was a cruel juxtaposition. The scientific expectations of his body's death versus the haunting reality. I watched Claire clutch her mother's hand as I spoke, the grief raw and unfiltered, her young face twisted with confusion and fear. Even the most seasoned nurses and doctors had left the emergency room shaken. No procedure, no technique, could have prevented this sudden rupture into the unknown. Walking the hospital corridors in the days following Robert's death, I remembered the antiseptic smell, the quiet murmurs of staff reflecting on what they had witnessed. Each monitor that had flatlined seemed to echo a question. How much do we truly know about death? How fragile is the boundary between life and the body's lingering activity? The visual memory of the hospital, the flatline, the family's disbelief, was inseparable from the morgue's cold reality that awaited Robert. These images, combined with the science that failed to explain him, created a tension that was at once clinical and profoundly human. Robert's struggle, though brief in time, rippled far beyond his own life. It was not merely his death that fascinated and haunted me, but the gap between what should have happened and what did, between biology and mystery, expectation and reality. The audience, like the family, must confront both the facts and the emotions entwined in this tragedy, feeling the weight of a death that science cannot fully explain. When I returned to the morgue to perform Robert Hayes' autopsy, the air was heavier than usual. The faint hum of the refrigeration units seemed to vibrate with a tension I could feel in my bones. Robert lay on the steel table, sheet pulled back, his body still unnervingly intact, yet somehow alive in its defiance of death. As I began my examination, I noticed it immediately. The blood. Thin, dark, yet warm to the touch, tracing slow, deliberate rivulets across the table. It was not the passive seepage of a decomposing body. It moved as though the vessels themselves were trying to communicate something impossible, something beyond my understanding. I started methodically, as any coroner must, noting each anomaly, each pattern. His skin retained an almost lifelike pallor in places, a strange elasticity, while other areas showed subtle bruising, inconsistent with the collapse at home. The blood, how could it have emerged? Science offers explanations for post-mortem hemorrhage, ruptured capillaries, fragile vessels weakened by age, the natural breakdown of tissue. But none of these accounted for the precise, almost patterned excretion I observed on the morgue sheet. I traced the streams with gloved fingers, each movement a calculated step into the surreal. I could almost hear the echo of the emergency room monitors, flatlining, mocking me with their finality. Medical experts often speak of decomposition in stages, algor mortis, rigor mortis, lever mortis. But Robert's body seemed to pause in defiance, as if time itself had fractured around him. I consulted pathologists, hematologists, forensic specialists, each offering insights that left gaps wider than the answers. Vascular fragility, chemical reactions after death, post-mortem circulation. They all sounded plausible when spoken aloud. But when I looked at Robert, none of it satisfied the eye, the gut, the undeniable reality of the blood still forming its patterns. As I continued the examination, my mind drifted to Robert's family. His daughter, Claire, had asked me once, "Will he be scared?" A simple, human question, yet it haunted me as I observed these anomalies. The sterile morgue and its precise instruments could not answer her, nor could the textbooks, nor the doctors, who shook their heads in polite disbelief. And yet, there he lay, pale, silent, bleeding in a way that was at once terrifying and mesmerizing. I recall pausing at the table, letting the silence settle around me. Each drop of blood was a whisper, a challenge to everything I believed about the end of life. I thought of the delicate balance of the human body, the pressures, the flows, the invisible mechanisms we trust to sustain us. And here, in death, that balance seemed to twist into something uncanny, something almost sentient. Shadows from the overhead lights stretched across the room as if to underscore the haunting nature of the scene. Flashbacks to his family flooded my mind. Margaret's quiet sobs in the hospital hallway, Claire's trembling hands, the paramedics' exhausted faces. Each memory intertwined with the current scene, blurring the line between science and humanity. It was not just a case. It was a meditation on the fragility of life, the mysteries lurking in our biology, the questions that science has yet to answer. Robert Hayes' body was teaching a lesson I had no words for, no formulas to explain, no easy closure to offer. It was a living paradox, a corpse that refused to accept the simplicity of death, and in that refusal, it demanded respect, attention, and a deep, unsettling curiosity. By the time the examination concluded, I was left with more questions than answers, the rhythmic dripping echoing in my ears long after I left the morgue. Robert's body, in its silent, inexplicable language, had challenged the limits of my understanding, leaving me to confront a reality that is as beautiful as it is horrifying. Sometimes, death is not an end, but an enigma. In the days following Robert Hayes' autopsy, I reached out to colleagues, specialists, anyone who might illuminate what I had witnessed. Theories came quickly, each plausible on paper, yet none capable of fully explaining the phenomenon. Forensic pathologists spoke of post-mortem clots and the sudden release of built-up vascular pressure. Hematologists mentioned rare blood disorders, fragile vessels that might rupture unpredictably. Even chemists suggested unusual reactions between bodily enzymes and tissues after death could, under extremely rare circumstances, produce fluid egress. Each explanation sounded credible in isolation, but none matched what I had seen. The blood on the sheet was too vivid, too deliberate, too alive in its appearance. I remember sitting in my office, surrounded by medical journals and lab reports, staring at the photographs I had taken of Robert. His body seemed to mock every attempt at rationalization. Experts spoke in calm, clinical tones, their logic precise and unyielding, yet the unease in their voices betrayed the same hesitation I felt. There was a tension, almost imperceptible, between what science could explain and what my eyes had witnessed. Each word they spoke was a carefully constructed bridge over a void of uncertainty. But no bridge could span the full gap. Colleagues described similar cases, but in each instance, the phenomenon was less dramatic, more explainable. Robert's bleeding had a clarity, a pattern that made it impossible to dismiss as routine decomposition. Some suggested that the explanation might lie in a combination of factors: age, undetected vascular weakness, chemical changes, even the particular way his body had been positioned after death. Yet even combined, these factors failed to account for the immediacy, the warmth, the seemingly intentional movement of blood. I felt, more acutely than ever, the boundaries of medical knowledge pressing in around me, reminding me that no matter how many degrees we hold, how many texts we study, nature will always contain secrets beyond our reach. The staff who assisted with Robert's case carried their own reactions. Nurses admitted to being unsettled, some confiding in hushed tones that they had never seen anything like it. The autopsy assistants, experienced in thousands of cases, spoke of a chill that had settled over the room, an unspoken acknowledgement that this was different. Their fear was not sensationalized. It was a profound recognition that life and death can defy understanding. Interviews revealed the same pattern: shock, awe, fascination, and a deep lingering sense of wonder. And in those conversations, I found a thread of something universal: the human need for closure. Families, doctors, coroners alike, all seek explanations to quiet the restless questions that follow death. Yet in Robert's case, closure remained elusive. The theories, while scientifically grounded, left gaps where the heart and mind sought answers. As I compiled the reports, the images, and the expert opinions, I realized that some mysteries exist not to be solved, but to challenge us, to remind us of the fragility of our understanding, and the humility required when we confront the finality of life. The more I learned, the more Robert's case became less about answers and more about questions that stretch beyond medicine, beyond science, into something profoundly human. How much do we truly know about the body, about death, about the unseen forces that linger in the spaces between? The experts offered explanations, but none could diminish the haunting reality I had witnessed. A man who, even in death, refused to be entirely still. Returning to Robert Hayes' family was like stepping into a house frozen in the moment of loss. Margaret, his wife, greeted me quietly, her eyes shadowed by sleepless nights and endless questions. Claire, their daughter, sat nearby, small hands twisting a frayed blanket, her face etched with the innocence of grief, too young to be fully understood, yet painfully aware of the absence beside her. The hospital had taken Robert from them, and the morgue had presented a reality even harder to accept, that his body had behaved in ways no one could explain. The bleeding, the patterns, the lingering defiance of death, these were details that refused to remain private, etching themselves into the lives of those he left behind. Margaret spoke haltingly, as though each word had to fight its way past a wall of sorrow. She recounted Robert's final morning, the way he had joked over breakfast, the brief pause to tie his shoes before heading out, the suddenness of his collapse. Her voice trembled when she described hearing from the hospital staff that everything had been done, and yet later learning of the post-mortem bleeding made the experience feel surreal. "It's as if he was trying to tell us something," she whispered, a mixture of fear, sorrow, and a yearning for understanding in her tone. Claire nodded quietly, recalling her last touch of her father's hand, the warmth she felt slipping away, replaced by a chill that seemed impossibly alive. The visual memories were as haunting as the physical ones. Photos of family holidays, Robert laughing at the barbecue, his hands planting flowers in the spring garden. Moments of ordinary life that contrasted painfully with the extraordinary circumstances of his death. Watching these images, I realized that the story was not just about a medical anomaly. It was about love, memory, and the sudden rupture of normalcy that death imposes. The audience needed to see that behind every post-mortem report, behind every analysis, there exists a human world of sorrow, confusion, and unanswered questions. I listened as they grappled with the notion that science could not fully explain their loss. Margaret admitted that she had sought comfort in the medical explanations, yet they offered only fragments of reassurance. "We want to understand," Claire said softly, "but sometimes we just can't." Their words carried the weight of humanity, the tension between our need to make sense of death and the cruel reality that some mysteries remain. In that room, the cold facts of the morgue collided with the warmth of memory and the ache of absence, creating a space of grief and wonder that no textbook could fill. As I left their home, the lingering quiet of Robert's absence followed me. The bleeding, the strange post-mortem behavior, the unanswered questions, these were not just clinical anomalies. They were wounds in the fabric of a family's life, shadows that extended beyond the morgue into their daily existence, into the silence of empty rooms and the rustle of gardens left untended. Robert Hayes' story, both scientific and profoundly human, reminded me that every mystery of the body carries with it the echoes of those who loved the person it once housed. In exploring the inexplicable, one cannot escape the emotional gravity tethered to it. In the quiet hours of the night, long after the morgue had emptied and the hum of refrigeration units became a steady companion, I found myself sitting alone, the weight of Robert Hayes' case pressing down in a way I had not anticipated. The autopsy had concluded, the photos had been catalogued, the reports filed, yet the images of his body, the inexplicable bleeding, the patterns that defied logic, refused to leave my mind. Sleep became restless, punctuated by flashes of steel tables, rivulets of crimson, and the echo of my own disbelief. In those hours, I began to understand that being a coroner is not merely a profession. It is a dialogue with mortality, a constant negotiation between science and the unknown. I reflected on the balance required in my work, the delicate line between detachment and empathy. Everybody carries a story, and every story carries the weight of those left behind. But with Robert, that balance had been disrupted. The familiar clinical scripts, the textbook explanations, the postmortem charts, the predictable physiological processes, no longer offered solace or certainty. Instead, I was confronted with a phenomenon that felt alive in its own right, and with it, a creeping awareness of my own limitations. The rigor of science met the enigma of human biology, and I realized that sometimes the mind cannot fully reconcile the evidence before it. I thought of the nights spent reviewing images, the slow, deliberate steps of the autopsy replaying in my memory, the eerie stillness of the morgue, the scenes played like a silent film, the steel of the table reflecting dim light, the slow drip of blood marking time, the hum of machines that had once monitored life, now silent in their permanence. In these moments, I felt the haunting intimacy of my profession, the responsibility not only to observe, to document, and to explain, but also to bear witness to the uncanny, to the mysteries that refuse categorization. The personal toll was undeniable. Sleep was fractured, meals were mechanical, conversations distracted by the constant replay of questions without answers. Friends asked how I managed such work. I could only offer vague assurances, because how does one explain the disquiet of seeing a body defy death itself? It was a reminder that, beneath the professional detachment, a human mind absorbs these experiences, contemplates them, and struggles with the weight of their implications. Science can catalog phenomena, but it cannot always soothe the mind grappling with the impossible. Yet, amidst the unease, there was also a profound awe. Witnessing Robert's body, in its strange post-mortem behavior, forced me to confront the limits of understanding. It reminded me that the human body, and perhaps life itself, contains mysteries too intricate and complex to fully capture. The coroner's role is to navigate that space between the known and unknown, to honor the deceased while pursuing knowledge, and to maintain a reverence for the fragility and resilience intertwined in every life. Robert's case left an indelible mark, a mixture of humility, fear, curiosity, and respect that would accompany me for years to come. In the end, the haunting is not just in the blood, nor in the inexplicable. It is in the questions it leaves behind, the sleepless nights, the reflections on mortality, and the understanding that some phenomena will forever evade human explanation. Robert Hayes had shown me that death is not merely an event, it is a boundary, sometimes blurred, sometimes defied, that demands acknowledgement, respect, and a readiness to sit with the unknowable. Despite exhaustive investigation, consultation with experts, and countless hours in the morgue, Robert Hayes' post-mortem bleeding remains unexplained. Every theory, every medical explanation ultimately falls short of fully capturing the phenomenon. And in that gap between understanding and mystery, a haunting presence lingers, not just in the morgue, but in the quiet spaces of thought and memory. As I walk past the empty steel tables, I can almost hear the whisper of questions that refuse to be silenced. How much do we truly know about death? How much remains hidden within the body in the final moments and the hours that follow? Robert's case leaves these questions open, unresolved, a stark reminder of life's fragility and the enigmas that persist even in an age of advanced science. I think back to Margaret and Claire, the weight of grief still fresh in their eyes, the echo of unanswered questions pressing on their hearts. For them, the medical anomaly is inseparable from loss. The blood that seeped from Robert's body was not merely a physiological mystery. It became a symbol of absence, of the human struggle to reconcile love with mortality certainty with ambiguity. Every photograph, every memory, every silent room in their home carries the echo of Robert's presence, and yet the reality of his death is inescapable. The interplay of science and emotion, the collision of fact and mystery, creates a tension that refuses closure, leaving an indelible mark on all who encountered him. Science offers frameworks, explanations, and patterns, but sometimes the human experience lies in what cannot be explained. Robert Hayes' case is a meditation on the limits of knowledge, a reminder that the body, even in death, can reveal secrets beyond our understanding. The blood, the patterns, the inexplicable nature of his post-mortem activity all serve as evidence that the boundary between life and death is far more fragile and mysterious than we often acknowledge. In this space, awe and fear coexist, curiosity and humility intertwine, and we are confronted with the profound reality that death is not merely a conclusion, but a doorway to questions that may never be answered. As the lights dim in the morgue and I close the case file, I feel the weight of Robert's story settle into the quiet corners of thought. The mystery is unresolved, and perhaps it should remain so. There's a solemn beauty in acknowledging that some phenomena resist explanation, that the human body is a vessel of complexities yet to be fully understood. Robert Hayes, in life ordinary yet extraordinary in death, leaves us with a reflection on mortality, on the unknown, and on the quiet power of the human experience. The haunting end of Robert's story is not meant to frighten, but to invite contemplation. It reminds us to respect the lives we touch, the mysteries we witness, and the questions that linger long after the clinical facts have been recorded. In the stillness of the morgue, in the silence of memory, and in the spaces between science and the unexplained, Robert Hayes' story endures, a haunting testament to life, death, and the mysteries that connect them. And perhaps, in the quietest moments, we are left with only one certainty, that some truths are not meant to be fully known, only felt, pondered, and remembered.